Okay, now we've got our player moving correctly backwards and forwards along the screen without having to make any additional sprites. So now we can start bringing in its attack, and for this exercise I'm only going to do the one attack which is going to cause instant death. You can of course create other attacks like kicking or biting or additional punches or super punches, and you can decide whether it does different damage, but just for now it's going to be one punch, instant death to our enemy. So we're going to go resources, create object, and this one's going to be called player underscore fighting, and we're going to bring in player punch sprite. Now what's going to happen in the moment, once the animation has played, it's going to change right back to the player object. So we're going to go add event, other, end animation, or animation end, sorry. And in here we're going to go to main 1 tab, we're going to select change instance. This will change the object back to another. This exercise is going to be player, and we want to set to perform event yes. We do want it to be able to move backwards and forwards and do everything that the player object has been set to do. So we're going to click OK, and I'm quite happy with all those settings, so again we're going to click OK. Another thing we're going to do as well that's slightly different, we're going to create another blank object called player parent. The reason we're going to do this is that when we with our room and with our background and with the health bar and everything that we're going to create, everything's going to move towards the player. The player sprite is going to constantly change, and because it's changing, it might break the connection so that, let's say, the bad guy that's trying to follow and attack us doesn't know to, if it's following the player to start with, but then it will not be able to follow the player when he's attacking or jumping or being dead, etc. And of course all the other objects that's set to follow the player will not work either. To solve this problem, we're going to create a parent. We're going to parent it to any player objects, and we're going to set all the other objects like the bad guy, the health bar, the camera, everything else to follow that parent. So simply we're going to go resources, create an object, and I'm going to call this one player parent, and we're going to go OK. We're not going to create any sprites, it's going to be empty, it's going to be completely blank. It's just going to sit there and just take up a little bit of extra room in the objects. Now you can go back to player, and here we can set the parent. So I click this drop down menu and click parent and go OK, and the same for the fighting one. So it's always in the parent. So now we can create our enemy and we can get it to follow the parent. But first of all, we're going to check if we're going to get our fighting action to occur, and then we're going to test that out. So player, we go back into here and we're going to give it its fighting attack. So add event. This one is going to be a simple key press, and I'm going to set to, you can set to any of these keys, but for now I'm going to set to the space bar, and it's going to do the same. It's going to switch it to the fighting one. So go self to fighting, and yes, we do want to perform the event. So go OK, and simply click OK, and hopefully that's all you have to do. So let's test this out. So now here we go, our character can move backwards and forwards, and pressing the space bar, and he's performing his attack whilst going right back to the player object. Now we've got our player able to move around and fight. We can now set up our enemy to follow its parent. Remember, if you don't have the parent, what will happen if you set the enemy to follow the player or the player fighting? When it switches between the two, it's going to break the connection, and then the enemy will not know who to follow, and thus creating errors. So now we're going to go to Resources, Create Object, and this time we're going to create the enemy. And we're going to bring in your enemy's idle position. So for mine, it's going to be him standing still. Unlike the player, which is being controlled by you, the enemy has to think for itself. So you've got to create its artificial intelligence. So to do this, we're going to add step and click step. What this will do, this will check every millisecond the game is running and run the following program. So first off, we've got to get our enemy to follow the parent, well, follow the player, sorry. So in the Move tab, at the very bottom, we've got Step Towards. So here we've got to add a little bit of coding. It's not too complicated. We're going to set to, make sure you spell it correctly, player underscore parent dot x. So what we're doing, we're making sure that its x value is equal to the player's value. So it's going to move towards the player. Now we're going to change its y position to y. Also do is make sure that the characters, when it's going up and down, is equal to itself. This will be very handy later on when we're adding solid objects and gravity. To make the game a bit more interesting and challenging, we're going to set the speed to a random number. So random bracket 3 close bracket. You can always change this. So what it's going to do, every step it takes is going to slow down and speed up. But I don't want it to be too much. If you set it to a higher number, you will notice it zoom across and slow down and do all kinds of crazy things. I think 3 for this game is quite a nice number. Leave relative unticked. Once it's set on its course, we don't really want to change it. Plus it's going to change because of the step. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to give it the option to look in a direction, but it's got to look for the player parent x value. So we're going to do this using a variable. So in control, we've got set variable, test variable, and draw variable. We're going to use the test one, so it's going to test to see if the variable's value is true, and if it is, it will perform the following actions. So first we've got to set the variable. So here, the variable will be x, so its own x position, and the value is going to be equal to the player parent.x. And we're going to say if the player's x is greater than our own, it's going to perform the following action. So we've got to say larger than. So there you go. You should have it set to this. And if it is, it's going to look right. We're going to bring in the transformation sprite there, and we're going to leave all these values set to a positive number except the angle. I'm going to leave those two as it is. All you have to do is press OK. But what if our value is less than the player's value? Well, we want the enemy to be able to turn around. So we've got to give it another option. To do that, we're going to go in Control, we'll go Else, back to Main 1 tab, and bring in again the transformation sprite. But this time we're going to change the X scale to -1. So now, when our enemy is in the room, which we're going to put it in a moment, It's going to move towards the player. It's going to check if its X position is greater than the player's, and if it is, it's going to look positive X. If it's not, it's going to check else and look in the other direction. So that's all you need to get your enemy to move correctly. So press OK. And to make let's put it in the room. So double click on room. Let's open this up here. We've got it already set to enemy. So now I can click and move this in place. Click OK. And now test the game. So as we can see here, the enemy's changing his speed. He's moving towards me. Now if I move away, again, he's able to change direction of his own accord depending on me as a player. Where I am, he's constantly after me. So there we go. All we need to do next is get it so that when we come in contact with the enemy, he's going to punch us. But I don't want to set it so he does it instantly, otherwise it doesn't create and makes it a bit too hard for the player. I'm going to set it so it checks randomly and then decides whether to punch me or not.